侍とは一体何か。その答えこいつが知っている。東国の秘剣青い
神道清掃流青い押してまいります。受けて立ちます。
Hey there, Octopath Traveler community, Silverox is here, and this is going to be the unit overview for Aoi, the heir to the Sublation Arts. Aoi is the latest Celestia Traveler that is added as an arena unit that is therefore free to unlock, free to upgrade all the way to A4 and 6-star if you can beat her EX3 fights. Otherwise, she is a very interesting warrior unit, taking place as probably one of the best arena units in the game, as a free unit at least. So, what does Aoi do? She is a warrior, and her role is simply just the sword DPS. Her special abilities is that she can give herself potency up when in sublation stance, and while in this stance, she can ignore evasion and damage nullification effects. Certain skills in sublation stance can also ignore enemy defensive buffs and multi-hit damage reduction effects. That means if you're fighting like a boss like the Ryu 120 or certain wave battles that have damage cap reduction, she can do all her multi-hits at full damage. Her preferred weapons would be brilliant swords for damage cap, as even with her ability to ignore multi-hit reduction effects, her max hits cap at 6. Her preferred accessories would be damage cap if main DPSing to extend her damage, sword damage up accessories if needed otherwise, like her own A4, or any other P attack boosting gear is needed, but mainly damage cap is what you want if she's main DPSing in her niche. So for her passive skills plus latent power, the best way to explain this the best I can. So her latent power, it has a 2-turn initial cooldown and 3-turn reuse cooldown. And what it does is, so she's always in a stance, like always. So by default, she's in Celestial stance. So when using her latent power, she'll switch to Sublation stance for 2 turns, granting herself 50% potency up and the ability to ignore evasive/damage nullification effects. However, she will remove the stance and swap back to Celestial stance after attacking with any skill. The normal attack does not remove it, nor does using like the ultimate technique to buff or using her aura skill to buff. It's only attacking skills will remove Sublation stance. This latent power is only usable if she does not have Sublative Insight, and you get that by when you're not in Sublation stance, you're automatically in Celestial stance. And if you have Sublative Insight, then this latent power cooldown will not count down. And I'll get to that in a moment, but basically it means that's a buff that improves Sublation stance. But while you have that buff to make Sublation stance better, you cannot get back into Sublation stance as easily because the latent power won't recharge. At the end of the turn, if in Celestial stance, and she has 10 or more buff or debuff icons, she'll restore an additional BP to herself, which is a very easy condition to meet. And also at the end of turn, if in Sublation stance, but she does not have Sublative Insight, she will extend Sublation stance by 1 turn and then grant herself Sublative Insight with the same duration as Sublation stance. And what Sublative Insight does is it increases the potency buff of Sublation stance to 100%. So if you kind of piece it together, what that basically means is that you want to go into Sublation stance and then either use the basic attack, not a skill, or use a self-buffing skill, so that way she does not lose Sublation stance, and because she made it to the end of the turn without losing Sublation stance, she will gain Sublative Insight, which will then double her potency to 100% for then the next turn when you do use an attack that will then get rid of Sublation stance. That will slow down her getting Sublation stance again, but that's the whole point. You want to nuke with 100% potency up, not 50% potency up, so that way she doesn't need support from someone else. Her 1-star passive is that she gives herself 20% sword damage up, and while in Sublation stance, she raises the passive sword damage buff limit to 50% for herself. Also, when you unlock her at 6-star, when in Sublation stance, she also grants herself dead aim and a 1.4 times critical hit multiplier for even more damage. Her TP passive is that when in Celestial stance, grants self a 50% chance to evade attacks, and if an attack is evaded from this passive or from the missed physical attacks debuff, gain 1 BP regen for one turn. basically when she's in Celestial stance, she's kind of like has like a BP battery for herself, so you can pump up her BP to then be ready to use Sublation stance to do nuking. Alright, so for all her skills are like have an effect, and then they all change based on what stance she's in. So her base kit, she has a 2-hit random target sword that in a Celestial stance is a 3-hit random target instead, but in Sublation stance it's a 2-hit single target. Then she has a 1-hit single target sword that when in Celestial stance she grants herself a 15% physical attack up buff for 3 turns, but when in Sublation stance she'll inflict 15% physical defense down on the enemy for 2 turns. She has a 3-hit single target lightning that exploits wind and inflicts 15% physical attack / magic attack down for 2 turns. When in Celestial stance, also has a medium chance to inflict paralysis for 2 turns. And when in Sublation stance, it exploits sword weakness. Then she has a 2-hit AoE wind that exploits lightning and inflicts 15% sword resistance down for 2 turns. When in Celestial stance, it has a medium chance to inflict blind. And when in Sublation stance, it also exploits sword weakness. Then she has a self 20% physical attack up buff for 3 to 6 turns. When in Celestial stance, she'll grant herself 1 to 4 stacks of dodge physical attacks. And when in Sublation stance, she'll also grant herself 30% sword damage up. Then she has a 3-hit single target sword that at max boost inflicts half effect from stat buffs for 2 turns, which does exactly what you think it does. It means if you're fighting an enemy that buffs itself, that you can see it like it gives itself defense buffs or attack up buffs or anything like that, it'll only get half the effect of that buff for 2 turns. It's basically the closest that we will ever get so far to a unit that can dispel enemy buffs, since this just halves their effect. When in Celestial stance, she will also inflict 1 stack of missed physical attacks, and when in Sublation stance, this attack will ignore defense buffs and damage reduction effects. For her 4-star skill, she has a 3-hit AoE sword, that when in Celestial stance, she'll also grant herself 15% sword damage up for 3 turns. And when in Sublation stance, this attack will ignore defense buffs and damage reduction effects. And if max boosted while in Sublation stance, she will double cast this skill. And this gives her 6-hit. Then she has a 3-hit random target sword with a medium chance to inflict 15% sword res down for 2 turns per hit. When in Celestial stance, it's a 5-hit random target instead. And when in Sublation stance, it's a 3-hit single target instead. Then she has a 2-hit single target sword that exploits lightning and wind and grants herself 15% physical attack up for 3 turns. When in Celestial stance, also restores 2 BP to herself, making easier BP battery recharge. And when in Sublation stance, this attack ignores defense buffs and damage reduction effects. If max boosted while in Sublation stance, she'll double cast this skill. And then finally, her TP skill is a Swift Strikes buff to do a 1-hit AoE sword at the start of turn for the next for 2 to 5 turns, or basically the next 1 to 4 turns after this skill turn is used for 1 times 180 power. I don't recommend using her as a breaker, but this can be a little extra damage or set up however you want. Alright, for her EX skill plus ultimate technique, her EX skill has 2 total uses, and it's unlocked after using her ultimate technique at least once. It's a 6-hit AoE sword that inflicts half effect from stat buffs for 2 turns. And if Self does not have Sublative Insight, then grant herself Sublation Stance for 2 turns. And when in Sublation Stance, this attack will ignore defense buffs and damage reduction effects and gain an additional 100,000 damage cap up. So as you can see, this like skill will give her Sublation Stance back if she does not have Sublative Insight. So if you were in Sublation Stance and without Sublative Insight and only had 50% potency up, you would then immediately lose Sublation Stance, but then get it back from this skill. And this is her best nuke because it has the extra 100,000 damage cap up effect. But like, as you can see, you kind of want to use this when you have Sublative Insight, so it gets 100% potency up, so it makes the most use of it. So that's why you don't, but you have to use it after the ultimate technique. But that's very important, so, because to explain the ultimate technique, I know it looks like a lot of text, but the ultimate technique is a support class ultimate. It's called Eye for an Eye Momentary Moonlight. And what it does is it removes certain abnormal status ailments and remove all stat down debuffs from all allies, and then grants herself 10% sword damage up for 3 turns. Now, here's the key on why this ultimate can actually be very good for her, especially considering you can back row cast it, is that if Self does not have Sublative Insight, grant herself Sublation Stance for 3 turns. That is really, really good, because what that means is she can actually get both turns. She can actually get her thing for both turns, at least get potency up for both turns, albeit second turn of break will only have 50% potency up, because she can use her ultimate, not her latent power, to give herself Sublation Stance for 3 turns. And then because she used her, because she made it to the end of the turn with Sublation Stance active without losing it, the next turn she'll automatically get Sublative Insight, meaning that she's ready to go with 100% potency up. Then you can use the 100% potency up to nuke with, and then at the start of the next turn, because her latent power should be available because you didn't use it to get Sublation Stance, you could then go into Sublation Stance right away, and then nuke for 50% potency up. And you won't be able to get 100% potency up both turns of break, but you can do this to get 100% then 50% potency up. If activated at 200% gauge, she'll also grant herself Nullify All Attacks buff for the next 4 attacks she takes. When an attack is nullified, she will counter with a 3-hit AoE sword that exploits wind and inflicts 15% sword res down for 2 turns. This is an active debuff, not an ultimate debuff. At ultimate level 10, the only change is that the sword damage up goes to 20%, and it goes up to 30% at ultimate level 20. And at ultimate 20, she gains 40% charge per BP, 80% with AU. That means it costs 4 BP to fully charge, 2 BP with AU. And the AU priority for this is irrelevant because all her stones are free to get anyway, so you should definitely take all her stones. I'd probably, unless you really need her A4 to use on her, though, I'd probably AU her first just for faster charge, because you do want to use this ultimate pretty much every fight you're using her in. So for her Awakenings, plus A4 accessory, plus exclusive accessory, A1 to 3, you're going to get them all because her stones are free to obtain from refights. A4 accessory is called the Tokugo Warrior's Bag. It gives 700 HP and 70p attack. While at full HP, grants self 30% sword damage up. And at the start of battle, grants self an HP barrier equal to 10% of her max HP, of the wearer's max HP. And if worn by a warrior, grant that warrior 100% ultimate gauge charge. Her A4 tier rating is an A tier A4. Because it has great stats for a free A4, and while swords damage up usually isn't that useful anymore since most DPS either self-cap or don't have room for it over a wanting damage cap, any supportive warrior can actually use this as an ult charge accessory, so it's worth getting the stones to unlock for sure. Her exclusive accessory is the Tokugo Warrior's Hair Tie. When in Celestial Stance, grant self-immunity to Paralysis, Blind, and Silence, and when in Sublation Stance, add 15% of critical stat to her P attack. This is obtained from exchanging 300 AoE fragments from the Memoir Refrights. For an optimal skill loadout, for her skills, I would take her 3-hit AoE sword that gives sword damage up in Celestial or double casts in Sublation, because this is her 6-hit skill that you can use when if you don't have her EX skill available to use as a nuke instead. Or you can, depending on how you want to do it. Her skill 2, I would take the 3-hit random target sword that debuffs sword res with each hit. It's a 50% chance, but it's a sword res down per hit, 50% chance, and if you're using this in Celestial Stance, it's a 5-hit sword, so that's good for shield shaving, and it's also 5 hits with the chance to debuff per hit. Skill 3, I would take herself 20% P attack buff, plus that either gives dodge visual attacks or 30% sword damage up buff. This isn't very important because you need a buff skill, so you can properly stall Sublation Stance to trigger Sublative Insight for higher potency up for break turns. Plus, it's a good self-buff anyway, because she can cap both her active and active damage up and physical attack up buffs by herself. Because with skill 4, I would take the 2-hit single target sword that grants herself 15% physical attack up, and which would cap with the other buff. And if you're in Celestial Stance, it gives you 2 PP, so that's a really good PP battery to get her PP back up. And it can be double casted in Sublation Stance for 4 hits if needed, which I wouldn't do that, but I'd mainly do it for the BP. The Swift Strike still can be useful if you want to use it, but I wouldn't recommend her as a breaker. For unit synergy, Aoi is a physical sword DPS and works best in those teams provided that you do not have better options and are using her in her niche of ignoring damage reduction effects, like against the Ryu level 120 NPC, where she can ironically do the most damage. Midia is a physical DPS support or extraordinaire that gives the front row follow-up attacks. Really great for Aoi's lower hit count. Shauna is a universal support best in class. Richard, active passive ultimate sword buffer, and also can help cap with Aoi's sword res down debuffs if needed. Rondo EX is a damage cap support, much needed for Aoi. Moruso EX, weakness exploits plus ultimate damage cap, and potency for second turn of break if you did not set up her sublation stance using her ultimate, then on the second turn of break, you're going to need that potency up. Or, even if you did set it that way, remember the second turn of break's only going to have 50% potency up, so you would need Moruso EX to get 100% potency up, because you can overwrite that, depending if you don't have another DPS that needs the potency. And then any remaining DPS slots, insert sword DPS here for remaining slots. If you are using her in like the fights or wave battles for with the damage reduction effects, then she pairs really well with people like Pardis that have Giga Nukes and stuff like that. Because like really high multi-hit sword DPSs are not going to do well in those fights, so you're going to want to pair with DPSs that do lower hits that get more damage. So you kind of just play that by ear. So for her overall rating, because there's no pull advice because she's a free unit, Aoi is easily on release the best free arena unit of them all in terms of damage capabilities and having a specific niche use that only she can do. Her hit counts may not be high, and she has a decently complicated kit that, if planned well, can be used to your advantage. But as a free warrior, she is very, very strong. The only flaw is that the accounts that she would help the most will likely struggle to get her to 6-star, because it requires beating her EX2 refight, which is not an easy feat at all. That being said, specific battles / wave battles with damage cap reduction effects, she can truly shine doing her full damage through those effects. Good luck in her arena fights, especially that 66 million HP EX3 refight. Good luck with that one. It's very infuriating. I mean, I'm sure some Giga Whales will cheese it out, but for most people, it's a pain in the butt, let me tell you. Overall rating, her DPS, it scales from a B to an S tier. Support B, heal, and tank not available. Overall, B to A tier unit. Her DPS scales based on her niche. In a fight with a damage reduction effect for multi-hits, she can do more damage than units with way higher hit counts with ease, so as such, playing to her niche makes her significantly better, but in general content, she's just a complicated yet decent warrior at best. Overall, it's a free unit, there's no reason you shouldn't try to get her. I mean, you get rubies for beating the fight, you get a unit that gives you influence, like, there's just no reason to not unlock her. If you're able to beat the X2 to get her to 6-star, same deal, go ahead and level her up. Like I said, there are some niche case fights where having her around might be very, very useful. But other than that, that's how to use Aoi. I know this video was a bit longer than normal, but she does have a kind of a complicated kit, so I did want to break it down to hopefully make it easier to understand for players. Otherwise, please like, follow, and subscribe for more COTC content to come. I will keep making COTC content on this channel. And thanks for anyone that watched, and good luck on the Aoi fights, everybody. See ya.